On September 15th, a Friday, the sky over New York's JFK International Airport was a flat, uninspiring sheet of gray. For the crew of American National Airlines Flight 1332, it was just another day. They finished their inventory of blankets and headphones, the cabin ready for the pilots to board. A new flight attendant, Chloe, couldn't contain her excitement, whispering that she had to post on her Instagram story about flying with Captain Thorne. She quickly opened her phone's front-facing camera to fix her bangs. Beside her, the lead flight attendant, Sarah, who had seen it all, was unfazed. She'd met the flight crew during the pre-flight briefing and saw nothing out of the ordinary. It was the same routine: takeoff, landing, New York to Chicago, Chicago to New York, repeated 1,000 times. The only difference today was that the captain was a national hero. Sarah playfully chided Chloe about the selfie, reminding her that pictures could wait until after they had landed. Chloe nodded in agreement, stating that the job, of course, came first. A few minutes later, the flight crew arrived: Captain Caleb Thorne and First Officer Alex Rivera. They exchanged polite greetings with the cabin crew. Within the airline, Caleb Thorne was a legend. 3 years ago, he had been at the center of the most severe aviation incident in the country's recent history. His flight, ANA 416, had been refueling at São Paulo Guarulhos International Airport in Brazil when contaminated fuel, a result of shoddy maintenance on the airport's pipelines, was pumped into the tanks. At cruising altitude over the Caribbean Sea, the fuel supply valves seized. At 35,000 feet, both engines failed simultaneously. Caleb had only been a captain for a little over a year at that point. When he broadcast his Mayday call 50 nautical miles from Miami International Airport, the news spread like wildfire through the aviation community. Chloe was still in flight school at the time and only learned about it afterward, but Sarah remembered it vividly. She was working for another airline back then, on a layover at a friend's apartment, and she had watched the entire life-or-death emergency landing unfold on live television. The plane's original destination was Houston, but it was uncertain if they could even reach land, let alone a runway. A water landing in the turbulent Caribbean would have been a death sentence for most of the 238 people on board. The miracle on the Hudson was called a miracle for a reason, and that was the calm, flat water of a river, not the churning, unpredictable sea. The 6-foot swells of the Caribbean could have ripped the aircraft apart on impact. To make matters worse, one engine had completely stalled. After 10 minutes of desperate maneuvering, Caleb managed to coax the other engine back to life. But its thrust was stuck at 70%, enough to get them to Miami, but far too powerful for a safe landing. He couldn't slow down. In the end, Caleb wrestled the Airbus A330 onto the longest runway at Miami International at a speed nearly 100 knots faster than normal. Upon touchdown, the right engine's thrust reverser failed to deploy. He slammed on the emergency brakes. The plane screeched down the entire length of the runway, coming to a halt just over 200 yards from the water at the far end. The entire harrowing event was broadcast live by Miami news outlets, who dubbed it the miracle of Flight 416. Some called it the most successful emergency landing in a decade. From the crew to the passengers, not a single person was seriously injured. After the last passenger was evacuated, Caleb and his first officer emerged from the cockpit. The moment they stepped onto the emergency slide, the tires, overheated from the extreme friction of the landing, burst into flames. The image was captured by reporters on the scene and replayed countless times on news channels worldwide. Initially, the airline tried to suppress the story while the cause of the incident was investigated. But passenger videos and media footage had already gone viral. Once the investigation concluded that the fault lay entirely with the contaminated fuel in São Paulo and that Caleb's handling of the crisis was flawless, the airline changed its tune. His heroic actions were widely publicized. Caleb was featured in countless news segments, interviews, and talk shows. He was reluctant, but his superiors insisted. He drew the line only when a producer for a national human interest series contacted the airline. The airline had not only avoided a catastrophic loss of life, but had also been gifted a star pilot. Caleb was handsome, 6'1", and came from a family of aviators, his father a pilot, his mother a lead flight attendant, and his grandfather a decorated Air Force veteran. He was a PR dream. His fame spread beyond aviation circles, so it was no surprise that a young flight attendant like Chloe felt like she had won the lottery by being on his flight. In the cockpit, after completing the pre-flight checklist, Alex Rivera asked if this was Caleb's last flight for the week. Caleb nodded, confirming he would have a couple of days off in Chicago before flying back. With his record and reputation, Caleb could have easily secured a permanent spot on the lucrative international long-haul routes, flying the big jets where a single round trip could fulfill a week's hours for more pay. But he had recently transferred to the short-haul domestic routes after getting certified on the Boeing 737. Alex didn't understand why, but wasn't close enough to Caleb to ask. Caleb was not the pilot flying this leg. He was letting Alex take the controls to build up his command hours while he handled the checklists and radio communications. The task was finished quickly, but a ground control snag at JFK left them waiting on the tarmac for another 30 minutes. Alex, a New Yorker, noticed Caleb's growing impatience and tried to explain that these delays had become common lately, possibly due to staffing shortages or just the sheer volume of Friday traffic. He recounted a recent 4-hour delay with another captain. Caleb joked that after 4 hours, they might as well have canceled the flight. Alex sighed, remarking that the airport was simply overwhelmed and in desperate need of expansion. Caleb watched with mounting frustration as a Delta and a United flight, both of which had pushed back after them, taxied past and took off. It wasn't his home base, but the injustice of it irked him. He reached for the radio, tempted to argue with ground control, but then thought better of it and clicked it off. The delay had made the passengers restless. One man was giving Chloe a hard time over a simple request for his coffee, nearly bringing the new flight attendant to tears. Caleb emerged from the cockpit to check on the situation. Since Alex was flying, Caleb was responsible for everything else, including cabin order. He saw Chloe discreetly wiping her eyes with a tissue. He frowned, but caught Sarah's eye as she put a reassuring hand on Chloe's shoulder. Sarah gave him a firm nod, a silent message that she had it under control. Caleb returned to his seat. Alex asked if everything was all right. Caleb told him it was nothing and to focus on his flying. He pulled out his phone. There were no new texts or messages. He slid it back into his pocket. In contrast to the noisy cabin, the cockpit was hushed and still. After 40 more minutes of waiting, Alex finally guided the Boeing 737 away from the gate. In those quiet moments, Caleb's mind inevitably drifted back to that day, 2 years and 10 months ago. He remembered the sickening jolt from the engines, the aircraft shuddering violently. He recalled the moment of pure panic as he watched the thrust gauges on both engines plummet to zero. The plane became a glider, dropping thousands of feet over the vast, unforgiving sea. Every second of that descent was seared into his memory, a record grooved into his mind, replaying itself over and over in the 1,000 days that followed. He forced himself back to the present, grabbing the radio and repeating the tower's instructions in a low voice. Under the immense power of the engines, the plane rapidly gained speed. His eyes were fixed on the airspeed indicator. V1, the decision speed. Past this point, there was no turning back. Rotate. The nose of the Boeing 737 lifted, climbing into the gray New York sky. At the New York TRACON facility, which managed the airspace around JFK, the pressure was immense. The facility handled a staggering volume of traffic, with dozens of controllers coordinating hundreds of flights per hour. Ben Carter, who had transferred from a small regional airport in Montana just 2 years ago, was still adjusting to the relentless pace. Fridays were the worst, packed with weekend travelers, and the high traffic volume increased the potential for error. He clutched the microphone, a thin sweat beading on his forehead, trying to remember his mentor's advice. Be clear, be concise, be correct. Thankfully, his mentor was sitting right behind him today, which offered some comfort. His mentor was Leo Vance. At a glance, they looked about the same age. Some pilots had even mistaken Ben for the senior controller. It was probably Leo's short-cropped hair, giving him the air of a college student, though he was already 29 and a senior controller at one of the busiest facilities in the world. He wasn't on the microphone at the moment, but he was monitoring Ben's work with unwavering focus. As the evening rush intensified, Ben began to struggle, casting a pleading look over his shoulder. Without a word, Leo nodded, slid his chair into position, and took the microphone from Ben's hand. Just as he cleared 2 departures, more arrivals crowded the screen. A Delta flight checked in. Leo glanced at the radar display and replied in flawless, unaccented English, Delta 2230, radar contact. Turn right heading 090, proceed direct JVN. Descend and maintain 2400. The Delta pilot read back the instructions perfectly. Ben watched in awe. His own radio English was functional, but Leo's was as crisp and natural as what he heard in movies. He wanted to compliment him, but there was no time. In less than a minute, Leo issued over a dozen rapid-fire commands. Once the small peak had passed, Leo handed the microphone back to Ben, offering a quiet word of encouragement that with practice, he'd get there too. Leo then mentioned he was going to walk up to the tower cab for a bit and asked if Ben would be okay. The tower cab, perched atop the control tower, offered a panoramic view of the airfield, while the TRACON controllers worked in a darker room below, staring at radar screens. The tower handled ground movements and takeoffs and landings within a few miles of the airport. Approach control, where Leo worked, managed a much larger radius, sequencing planes for arrival and guiding them out to their flight routes. Leo had always preferred the bigger picture. Up in the tower, Emily was on duty, her voice a calm and pleasant melody over the frequency. As Leo arrived, he heard her clear a KLM flight for takeoff. KLM 1237, runway 17L, cleared for takeoff. He watched the airline's distinctive blue livery as the massive A330 gracefully lifted into the air. Suddenly, Leo heard a faint pop. Instinctively, he grabbed a pair of binoculars and focused on the ascending aircraft. He spotted it almost immediately. The right rear tire looked shredded, a piece of rubber flapping in the wind. He couldn't be certain, but in this job, you never took chances. He stepped over to an open console and pressed the transmit button. KLM 1237, JFK Tower. It appears you may have a blown tire. Please advise. A moment later, the pilot's voice came back, confirming the tower's observation. A tire pressure had just illuminated in the cockpit. Leo's voice remained steady. He instructed the pilot to maintain his heading and altitude and state his intentions. The KLM pilot, equally calm, declared they would be returning to JFK for landing. Leo was already on the emergency line, notifying ground crews and emergency services to prepare for a landing on runway 20R, and ordering runway 17L closed until it could be inspected for debris. Emily, who had been focused on another landing, hadn't seen the incident and deferred to Leo's judgment. He told her he would handle the radar guidance from the Tracon downstairs. An aircraft with a problem can't just turn around. It needs to be guided through the approach pattern to line up with the runway again. Leo hurried back downstairs, taking the microphone back from Ben. "We've got an inbound emergency. KLM blew a tire." Just then, 2 more arrivals appeared on his screen. He quickly rerouted them to other runways, ensuring they would be clear of the closed runway 17L. Whether the tire burst due to pressure or debris on the runway, that strip of asphalt had to be inspected and cleared before it could be used again. On a busy Friday evening, this was a logistical nightmare. He checked the radar. The KLM flight was climbing. He cleared them to a higher altitude to begin dumping fuel. A fully loaded A330 is too heavy to land safely. It needed to shed weight to reduce the stress on the remaining tires. Just then, another aircraft entered his airspace. He glanced at the tag. ANA 1332, a Boeing 737. The captain's voice was a low, slightly raspy baritone that sounded vaguely familiar. Caleb Thorne held the radio, his mood souring. The weather in New York was clear, but that did little to improve his spirits. He had been on the frequency for 2 minutes, listening to the flurry of commands, unable to get a word in. It was going to be a long night. The controller's voice sounded lazy, a smooth announcer's cadence laced with a New York accent. Caleb was surprised. His friend from flight school, Rachel, usually worked this shift. He had been flying this route for over a month and often landed around this time, and Rachel would sometimes pull a string to get him an earlier landing slot. But tonight it was someone new. Caleb, eager to land, requested a different runway, one he knew from experience would be a shortcut. He was unaware it was the same runway Leo had reserved for the KLM emergency. Leo's response was swift and dismissive, telling him that runway 20R was also active and to request another. Caleb immediately suggested an alternative, but Leo didn't reply. His priority was the KLM flight, now climbing through 6,000 feet. After a few tense seconds without a response from the KLM pilot, Leo felt his heart jump, but a quick check of the radar confirmed the plane's course and altitude were stable. The emergency transponder code blinked on his screen, a small relief. The most dangerous phases of flight were takeoff and landing. 80% of all accidents happened then. He couldn't afford a single mistake. The KLM pilot finally confirmed Leo's last instruction. Leo rattled off a new set of vectors, and only then did he get back to Caleb. American National 1332, say again you were stepped on. It was standard radio procedure, but there had been no interference. Leo had simply cut him off. Before Caleb could respond, the captain of a Majestic Airlines flight broke in. He suggested that if American National 1332 was low on fuel, they should go ahead, and Majestic would wait. A smile finally touched Caleb's lips. He didn't care for fame, but sometimes it had its uses. Whether the other pilot recognized his voice or was just being courteous, Caleb didn't care, as long as it got him on the ground sooner. But Leo denied the request again, restoring Majestic to their original place in the sequence. Then, in that same languid tone, he addressed Caleb. American National 1332. Caution wake turbulence from the 747 ahead. Your separation is minimal. Caleb swore under his breath. He waited for the Majestic flight to land before keying the mic again, his voice tight with frustration. He pointed out that while Majestic was ahead in the queue, his plane was at a lower altitude, and he questioned the controller's logic. Leo's reply was unyielding. He explained again that there was an emergency on the ground and that Caleb had been advised of delays. He concluded by giving the number for the duty supervisor's office, welcoming him to file a complaint if he had any further issues. Faced with such a stonewall response, Caleb could only sit and fume, following the controller's instructions to hold in the air. He wondered who this controller was, maybe some rookie Rachel was training. He made a mental note to call Rachel the moment he was on the ground. An hour and a half later, after Leo had expertly guided the KLM flight through 2 wide circles over the city, allowing it to dump fuel while he juggled dozens of other aircraft, the emergency was over. The KLM pilot, a man named Kenji Tanaka, brought the A330 down for a smooth landing. As the emergency vehicles converged on the plane, a voice came over the frequency, speaking in clear, formal English. JFK approach. This is KLM 1237. Thank you for your guidance tonight. Could I get your name? I'd like to buy you dinner sometime. Leo was taken aback. It wasn't often a pilot thanked him so sincerely over the radio. It's all part of the job, he finally replied, a little awkwardly. The pilot's voice was lighter now. All right then. I'll find you another time. The incident caused Leo to stay an hour past his shift. He was filling in for Rachel, and the sudden switch from his usual night shifts to a day shift had left him feeling disoriented. As he was packing up, he suddenly remembered his argument with ANA 1332. He asked Ben to pull up the flight plan. Ben found it quickly. Leo leaned over the screen and immediately understood why the voice had sounded familiar. The flight plan read, ANA 1332, JFKORD. First Officer, Alex Rivera. Captain, Caleb Thorne. Ben let out a low whistle. He knew the name. He worriedly asked if Leo had just made an enemy of a celebrity pilot and if they were going to get a complaint. Leo just gave a cold smile and said he wouldn't. He clapped his trainee on the shoulder and told him to head home. It was almost an hour later when Alex finally guided their 737 to the gate. After all the passengers had disembarked, he offered to stay behind and handle the paperwork, seeing Caleb's foul mood. But Caleb waved him off. As he stood up, he passed Chloe and asked her gently what had happened earlier. She was starstruck that he even remembered. She stammered out an explanation about the demanding passenger and the delayed flight. She said Sarah had handled it and thanked him for his concern, blushing when she realized she had called him by his first name instead of Captain Thorne. Caleb just smiled, not seeming to mind. In the commotion, Chloe forgot to ask for a photo, but she felt that having her hero personally check on her was even better. Stepping off the plane, Caleb looked out across the tarmac at the solitary control tower, silhouetted against the vibrant sunset. The controller's voice echoed in his mind. You're welcome to file a complaint. He considered it for a moment, then shook his head. The guy had been a jerk, but he hadn't actually done anything wrong. It wasn't worth the hassle of filing the reports. He suspected the controller knew that, which was why he had been so bold. The thought made him angry all over again. He pulled out his phone to text Rachel and saw that the incident was already being discussed in a group chat for New York-based pilots. A pilot from another airline was the first to ask if there had been an accident, saying approach control had him flying in circles. Someone explained about the KLM tire issue. The conversation then turned to Caleb's argument with the controller. Another captain urged Caleb to file a complaint, asking what was wrong with ATC that day. The majestic pilot who had offered to give up his spot chimed in. Caleb, I tried to get you in sooner, brother, but no luck. Caleb recognized him and replied with a thank you emoji. Then another pilot commented, sounds like you ran into Director Vance. Caleb didn't recognize the name. The other pilot explained, Leo Vance. He's a tough one. Can't be bribed, can't be charmed. The name sounded familiar, but Caleb couldn't place it. He exited the group chat and messaged Rachel directly, asking if her trainee was covering her shift. Rachel replied with a confused emoji, asking when she had gotten a trainee. Caleb typed out the name, Leo Vance. Rachel, sharp as ever, immediately understood what must have happened. She explained that Leo wasn't her trainee. He was a colleague, a fellow senior controller. Then she added, he's our junior from Embry-Riddle. You must have met him. That's why the name was familiar. Rachel sent one last message, a seemingly pedantic correction. It's Vance. Fancy. A few days later, Caleb was on approach to JFK when a familiar female voice greeted him over the frequency. Rachel was back. His mood lifted, and they exchanged a few pleasantries. As he was heading out of the terminal after his flight, he saw a familiar face walking out of a coffee shop. Before he could think, his feet were moving, following the man. Hey. Leo Vance was in a hurry, grabbing a cold brew before his shift, and was startled to be stopped so abruptly. He looked up and recognized Caleb Thorne immediately. It was hard not to. The man's face was plastered all over the airport on airline advertisements. Caleb wasn't looking at his face, but at the ID badge hanging from his neck. It confirmed he was an approach controller. Leo Vance. His instinct had been right. He finally said the name, his tone casual but firm. Leo Vance. That was you on approach the other day, wasn't it? Leo knew what this was about. He kept his expression neutral. Which day? Caleb felt a flicker of annoyance. Last Friday. On approach. Leo didn't bother denying it. Right. American National 1332. He had a sharp memory. Seeing Leo's nonchalant attitude, the anger Caleb had suppressed for a week began to simmer again. He asked why Leo had handled the situation the way he did, even after another pilot had offered to yield. He asked if Leo had something against him. His tone was half joking, but his expression was serious. Leo's brow furrowed. There was a blown tire on runway 17L. An emergency landing taking up another runway. You knew that. It wasn't personal. First come, first served. It's the rule. In his mind, he was thinking, so, just because you're famous, I'm supposed to bend the rules for you? Caleb realized he wasn't going to win this argument. He softened his tone, trying a different tactic. All right, well, you're my junior from school. Let's just try to have a little professional courtesy from now on. It was an attempt to save face. But Leo wasn't one to be easily placated. He saw an opening and took it. Captain Thorne, if you really understood professional courtesy, you wouldn't have been making a dozen requests a minute when you could clearly hear the ground crews were handling an emergency. The comeback left Caleb speechless. He was a senior captain, a celebrity, but in the air, he was at the mercy of men like Leo Vance. He took a breath, conceding defeat. Fine. You're right. He looked at Leo, who was glancing at his watch. Finally, Leo let out a sigh, as if exasperated. Look, I have to go. He didn't want to make it more awkward than it already was. They worked in the same small world. Caleb nodded, watching Leo walk away into the terminal's bustling crowd. It was only then that he realized Leo looked different from how he remembered him in college. Back then, he'd just been a tall, lanky kid on the track team. Now, he was still lean and tall, with the same short hair, but he carried himself with a new confidence. He was handsome, but it was clear their shared alma mater meant nothing to him. Caleb pulled out his phone again, messaging Rachel. Your friend Leo seems to have it out for me. Rachel replied with a laughing emoji. You big shot. Serves you right for trying to pull rank. She then asked if he wanted her to broker a truce. Caleb asked for Leo's number. Rachel sent over the contact card. The profile picture was a silhouette against a mountain landscape. He sent a friend request. Later that week, Caleb was flying a late-night leg into JFK. When he checked in with approach control, he was greeted by that same lazy, New York-inflected voice. Caleb read back the instruction, then paused. The frequency was quiet. "Slow night." "Huh?" he said into the void. To his surprise, the voice from the radio answered. "Nights are always like this. Just two of us watching the screens. You're flying late tonight." Caleb was surprised. He had recognized his flight number was different from the usual. He confirmed it was a late turn on his Tuesday schedule. A long silence followed, punctuated only by the occasional instruction from Leo. As Leo guided him onto the final approach, the sequence of commands and readbacks fell into a comfortable, professional rhythm. An air traffic controller guiding a tiny aircraft onto a narrow strip of asphalt from miles away was a feat of precision, a delicate dance of numbers and vectors. When Leo gave the final clearance, American National 8182, cleared to land, Caleb brought the plane down smoothly. On the ground, American National 8182, Caleb reported, a relaxed tone in his voice. "See you later." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And don't forget to accept my friend request." The young first officer beside him looked at Caleb in shock, wondering if he was allowed to say that. Caleb just glanced at him, a small smile playing on his lips as he taxied. "Rule number 1, he said. Always stay on good terms with ATC. By the time Caleb got home, it was after 2 in the morning. His phone buzzed. "Leo Vance has accepted your friend request." Caleb almost forgot he'd sent it. It seems some people kept even later hours than pilots. He sent a message about Friday. "I was out of line. My apologies." Leo's reply came back almost instantly. "It was business. If you're over it, I'm over it." Caleb sent back an okay emoji. He was starting to realize that Leo Vance had a real talent for killing a conversation. A week later, Caleb was on approach during a rainstorm. The weather made the controllers' jobs exponentially harder, but Leo handled it with practiced ease. Caleb's flight was sequenced behind another aircraft. He keyed the mic. "Hey, New York. Requesting runway 17L, if possible. American National 1560. Runway 17L was significantly closer to his gate than 17R, which would save him 20 minutes of taxiing. Given the weather and traffic, he fully expected to be denied. Leo's voice came back. "American National 1560. Stand by." Caleb held his breath. Maybe there was a chance. Leo came back on. "American National 1560. Can you accept a visual approach to 17L?" Caleb was flying a 747, a heavy jet that handled much better in turbulence. The conditions were acceptable. He quickly confirmed. He landed without having to wait in line. He was in a good mood. As Leo handed him off to the tower frequency, Caleb couldn't resist. "Roger. Thanks for the help, Director Vance." There was a pause. Then Leo's voice, trying to sound stern but failing to hide a hint of amusement. "American National 1560. Keep the channel clear unless you have something to report." Caleb replied smoothly, "Nothing to report, just appreciating the good work." "American National 1560. Leo clicked his mic off without another word. The other pilots still on the frequency were probably laughing. After his shift, Leo found a message from Caleb on his phone. It was a photo of the rain-soaked tarmac at JFK, the sky breaking into a spectacular sunset. The picture was taken from the cockpit window. Below it, a caption, "The view from 17L is pretty great." Leo saw the intention and typed back a playful reply. Someone on the frequency was complaining about Royal American Airlines getting special treatment. Caleb's response was immediate. "Who?" Leo feigned ignorance. "Don't remember the call sign." Then another message from Caleb. "Get me 17L next time. and I'll buy you coffee. Leo smirked. So that was his game. But this time he wasn't annoyed. He just typed back, "What about tonight's?" Caleb replied, "Are you off shift? I'm buying now." 5 minutes later, Leo walked up to the airport's artisan coffee bar, Koza, and waved. Caleb was already at the counter. He held up his phone to pay, honoring his promise. He asked what Leo wanted. Cold brew, Leo started to say, but then stopped. He didn't need the caffeine now. He studied the menu and chose a decaf matcha latte with elaborate foam art. He joked that he was picking the most expensive thing on the menu to make him pay. Caleb just laughed and told him to pick whatever he wanted. As they waited, Emily from the tower came downstairs and, after searching for Leo, found him at Koza. She saw him standing with Caleb, both men leaning against the black marble counter, lost in conversation. Leo was in his controller's uniform, a crisp shirt under a gray sweater, while Caleb wore his pilot's uniform, a black overcoat draped over his shoulders. They made a striking pair, and more than a few passers-by did a double take. "There you are," Emily said, walking up to them. "I was waiting for you." She greeted Caleb a little shyly. Leo, a grin playing on his lips, gestured with his chin toward Caleb. "My new supervisor." Caleb took the joke in stride. "Hardly. When we're in the air, you two are my supervisors." He asked if they were heading to dinner. Emily, flustered by the handsome captain's attention, invited him to join them. Caleb checked his watch. He was tempted, but he had to visit his mother at the hospital. He politely declined, promising to treat them next time. As Caleb walked away, Emily nudged Leo. "You two seem to be getting along now." Leo took a sip of his matcha latte and smiled. "You could say we came to an understanding."